How would you, I guess, approach the question of what it means to be human in light of those definitions of mind and matter?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it's a question that I think people in the sciences have long been really fascinated with, and still really fascinated with, right? It's a question that comes up all the time, which in and of itself is really interesting. We seem desperate to try to find a distinctive, right? Because we all seem to sort of think that there is, but we clearly are having trouble figuring out what that is, right?
Having an identity crisis as a species.
Yeah, and for a long time now, right? So there have been so many iterations of this in the scientific community. For some time, people in the sciences thought there were behavioral features of humans that were specific enough to humans that that's really what sets us apart. But more research has really just uncovered that that's actually more pervasive in the animal world than we realized. Right? Then we sort of went to anatomical features. Right? Same kind of sticky problem there. Then we just kept digging deeper, like, well, maybe if we went to the cellular level, right? Then we realized that, probably half the cells in our body are not human at all and are microbial, as I just alluded to, and like that blew our minds. Well, what does that mean, right? Then you can get to the genetic level, and as I've already alluded to today, we've got a lot of pieces of viruses in our DNA that are actually critical to performing various functions that we ascribe to being human. So how do we reckon with that, right? So we are not as distinct from other species, or really even as materially special from other species as we once thought, or that we still sometimes like to think, right? There's a fundamental connectedness with the rest of creation that we have to reckon with, right? That's not to say that there aren't some features that you can measure or look at and say, wow, that's kind of on this end of the spectrum, for sure. For example, it was recently shown that dendrites, right, these are these arborous extensions at the end of neurons, are way sort of bushier and longer in human beings than even our primate cousins, right? And certainly other species as well. So that's really interesting. I think it's a cool discovery. What exactly could that mean for cognition and complex thought is a really interesting question that neuroscientists are addressing and should address. But it's not really that satisfying at the end of the day, because it's more of a spectrum issue, right? It's not a qualitative distinction. It's a quantitative thing. And certainly there's overlap with other species. And there's the danger of hinging on something like that. I mean, if there's a human being born with a mental defect, we don't want to run the risk of saying that individual isn't human because they don't have arborous extensions at the ends of their neurons that are exactly like mine. I think that would be a grave mistake, right? And so at the end of the day, those kinds of attempts, I think, have been dissatisfying, right? But I think what it has done is, together with the notion that science is agnostic with respect to the whys, right? Science is really good at the how, right, the mechanistic exploration of a phenomenon, right? But it's generally agnostic with respect to the why. It's neither going to support or refute an idea like God, right? And so together with that notion and the fact that science hasn't been particularly helpful in drawing clear, definitive lines between us anatomically, behaviorally, molecularly, cellularly, genetically, perhaps there are other ways of being able to, identify or define a human distinctive. And maybe we'll get to that more in the conversation. But that's sort of where my thoughts are right now in terms of thinking about mind and matter is, I don't think that our matter is really effective at being able to definitively demonstrate some uniqueness to humanity. The mind gets a little closer. The fact that we use our mind to sit here and talk about what our meaning is, I think that's pretty special. And I don't know of other species that are organizing Veritas forums to talk about what the meaning and the purpose of our lives might be. I think that's getting a little closer to the human distinctive. But maybe we'll have a chance to talk more about that.
Yeah. I think that one of the puzzles and one of the questions, we've got a philosopher's move. Ready? You got to ask a question about the question. Yeah. So a question to ask about the question, like what makes us human? It's like, okay, well, why do we want to know what's human? Why do we want what's the purpose of the demarcation? Yeah, okay. So, okay, it's for the specialness. Got it. So one version of it is so that we can explain why we treat different animals differently, like why we get to eat them or something like that. But if it's like, okay, what makes us special? Got it. And I think that exactly what you had said, Praveen, which is, look, the capacity that we have to ask what we're about. It's that reflexive element that looks like it's something distinctive about us. Because mindedness isn't the only thing. It's like there are minds all over the place. Like mindedness should not be the criterion, because like certainly for moral standing, because then all those meat things that we had for dinner out, right? You're like, and then I win that discussion, the vegetarian in the group. And so, but the second point is that, look, I think that there's something distinct about humans on two fronts. One, we're the kind of being for whom our own being is a question for us. Whenever you're growing up, the thing that mattered the most to you is, who are you? Who are you? What am I? What am I supposed to do? The purpose, not just the purpose, but just who you are now, what you're on the road to, where you came from. Who you are is a question. You ask that question about whenever you do the 23andMe, whenever you do that, like, hey, I want to find out where my genes come from, or I want to know. Whenever you follow up with your grandparents, or whenever you sit down and you even look at the family photo album, you're looking at where you came from, trying to figure out who you are. It means something to you. Who you are is a thing that's a question. And the thing is that cats are existential in a different way. They don't have existential crises. A cow has never been like, what am I? They just say moo and eat grass, right? We're the kind of beings that have existential crises. And in some ways that makes us distinct, but that also makes us tragic. That who we are is something that we want so badly to know. We want so badly to know. Tell me who I am. What am I? Give me a purpose. That desperation, I think, also is a kind of cry in the wilderness that too many people hear you cry and they say, I've got an answer. Hold on to your wallet whenever someone shows up and they know that you're desperate for an answer to that. Because I think that the thing that makes us so distinctive is also a thing that makes us tragic, and is also something that makes us easily manipulable. That being given a purpose and being told what you are and who you are, and that you're part of a larger kind of thing that makes it, that ennobles you and sanctifies you, I'm suspicious whenever folks come to that with me. I'm a skeptic. Because I think that it touches something that in some ways the Christian tradition is really good at theorizing this. Our fallenness and the cry in the wilderness is a good way to be able to capture that existential lostness. But I'm unsure that it's the right story as to what kinds of beings we are. I think that they theorize how lost we feel. I think there's something right about that. We were just bonding over St. Augustine over dinner. I think that there's something right about that tradition, about the problem.
Yeah, I think it certainly makes us very vulnerable, doesn't it? I think it's what sets us apart, right? This notion of us sitting here and wondering about who we are and what we're supposed to be doing and what our purpose is. There's a noble kind of element to it. But it is also tragic in the sense that it does make us very vulnerable. And I hear you there, yeah, loud and clear. In maybe much the same ways that love does. Right? Love is one of the noblest and most remarkable feelings of the human experience. It is also the thing that will rip you apart. All kinds of love, right? Romantic love, father-child love, friendly love. I mean, just all kinds of things. But we keep coming back to it, don't we? And so there's something there to me. I have not been compelled by the idea that these things are evolutionary misfirings, that the things we find most compelling and beautiful about life, that keep drawing us back, are mere byproducts of a process that brought us to where we are now. Don't get me wrong, I'm very much, I study the evolutionary process, right? So there's no doubt in my mind that evolution contributes to everything about who we are. What I mean to say is that I think there is a deeper meaning in these things that we crave for, right? And that it isn't simply something that is a misfiring or a byproduct that we can safely dismiss. I think they are they're central. And I think that the more noble, the more important and impressive something is, a pursuit is in our life, the more vulnerable we are by it. And so the more care ought to be taken in the venture and the exploration of it. Yeah.
Thank you both so much for your thoughts on that. So now for all the people that we just gave an existential crisis to, we're going to give you guys a little answer, hopefully, as we go into our last topic of meaning. And I just want to ask you both, how do you feel like in your worldview, in your framework, you find meaning in your life or in your work?
Thanks. I'm a practicing half-hearted Stoic. The ancient Romans, and under the tutelage of some Greek insight, had developed a program of perfecting one's reason and of mastering one's emotions. But one of the crucial things about Stoicism was that it's not just a life hack and it's not just a productivity strategy. Stoicism is a way of life that emphasizes that the meaning of your life is in the connections and the duties that you have to others. And so the place where I start is in terms of the position that I have and all of the young minds that are under my tutelage. Anyone who's been in any one of my classes knows that I put everything into every hour of my class. Not because it's a job, but because it is the thing that I am called to do. I do the same thing as a father. I do the same thing as a neighbor. I do the same thing as a citizen. My job is to do what's right by the folks who depend on me. And that means my students, my children, my wife, my neighbors, and my fellow citizens. I have a duty and I have a role. I have a place because of where I am. Part of the challenge that I've got in terms of my meaning is sometimes feeling like I'm constantly treading water. As a citizen, I don't even need to go into it here. As a parent, I'm constantly feeling like I'm not doing enough. As a husband, in terms of how much one loves one's partner, it always feels like, what? We just missed each other. We're spending our lives together, but what are we doing? We're passing each other like, I gotta get to work.
Ships in the night. Yeah.
And as a teacher, I'm gonna say, I see your phones. Oh my God, I hate your fucking phones. And so even in the place where I can find a little foothold of meaning, I'm always feeling like it's slipping away. I'm always feeling like it's a little failure. I'm always feeling like I'm not doing enough and it's not catching on. But the duty still remains. The duty is to continue to do my best.
Who knows John Polkinghorne? Is that name familiar to anybody? Oh, that makes me sad. So John was he was an Anglican priest in one part of his life, and he was an award-winning physicist in another part of his life. Actually, that was the first part, and then upon retirement from science, became an Anglican priest, and was really the dominant voice in the sort of science-faith conversation for many, many decades in the Western world. And he had this simple analogy when people asked him about how science and faith sort of coexisted in his brain without it sort of erupting into flames. And he said, listen, you got to see the world with two eyes. Right? And what he meant by that was, look, if somebody walks into a room and there's a tea kettle, right, water's boiling, right? And someone asks a question, what's going on over there, right? Well, he said, I could give you the answer that would be the physics answer, right? And I would get all into sort of what water boiling means and how that works, right? And give you that explanation. But I could also just tell you I wanted to make tea, right? I could answer that question on two different dimensions, on two different levels, and they're both true, right? And I think it's important that we be open to both of those kinds of answers if we really want to make progress in our understanding of things. Right? So that's where John came from, and I'm cut from that fabric a bit myself. Right? That doesn't always mean that there is, an obvious second eye through which to see, right? If there's something that has a natural explanation, maybe there is another way to see this, right? It doesn't mean that there's always an obvious answer for that, and I want to make that clear. But from my standpoint and the work I've done to try to sort of have understanding in my life, right, one of the key starting points for me is that science doesn't constrain me to look only to science in my pursuit of what could be real or what could be true. Right? It didn't point me to my faith, but it gave room for it. Right? It gave room for me to explore the possibility of it. Right? And we don't have time today, and nor is it the real point of this discussion for me to get into the sort of details of, well, why did I think that was reasonable or sensible when I went down that route, right? And that perhaps is a story for another day, but the point I want to make today is that a real honest understanding about both the power and the limitations of science as a scientist led me to consider that there may be another way to see things, right? There may be another way of knowing. Right? That science is agnostic to. Right? The end point of that in my own journey, right, was appreciating the Christian notion that we are all, each and every one of us here, made in the image of God. That phrase, right, is a really interesting and fascinating one, and one that has generated lots and lots of debate and interesting discussion over the years. But what makes it so interesting and cool is that if you read the Genesis story about creation, it's really the only thing I can identify that distinguishes, talking about a human distinctive, that distinguishes humanity from the rest of creation in that narrative, right? In one version of the narrative, we don't even get a separate day, right? And if you look at all the other pieces, it's pretty consistent with the notion that we're mostly just like other animals, right? And even Ecclesiastes and other parts of the Bible say, well, from dust you came, and to dust you will return. There's this emphasis that when it comes to the stuff you're made of, you're really not as special as you might like to think, right? But this image of God thing really stands out, right? And if it confuses you a lot, it sort of stands out like a sore thumb, right? For those of you who might be interested, something influential for me were the writings of Richard Middleton. He was an Old Testament scholar, and he has a book called The Liberating Image. And he goes into talking with Old Testament Near Eastern context to understanding what these things mean. And his best understanding, and many other scholars agree and appreciate this, is that this has nothing to do with our biology. It has nothing to do with what we look like or whether we have 2 ears or one or those kinds of things, but rather that it is a vocation. It is a calling to reflect and represent the character and the values of God, which actually, interestingly enough, converge with what Scott is saying in the sense that what are those values? What is that character? Well, fundamentally, over and over again, what we're told it is that as a character to serve, right? Is that actually a biblical and proper understanding of kingship is not actually one where you just do whatever the heck you want without any care to anybody, but an ancient Near Eastern understanding of that concept is actually one of service, even to the point of your exhaustion for others. And then we see that modeled in Christ himself, right? So when I think about what my purpose is and what my meaning is, I go back to image of God and the fact that it says Christ imaged better than anybody else. And what did he do? Give himself up, serve himself for everyone else to the point of exhaustion, to the point of death. And so then I think that's my purpose. So whether I am doing that through science, whether I'm doing that in the academy, whether I'm sitting here talking to you all, I want my orientation and my posture to be one of how can I give? How can, whether that is of energy, whether that is of effort, whether that is of wisdom, whether that is of financial resources, every context calls for something else. But I want to be oriented to how can I give? And that's where it comes